Hello and welcome back for the next session. Hopefully, it's not just 7 and 8. I'll try and cover the next few chapters so that this is either the last or one before the last session on the namesake. So, we are going to cover chapter 7 to 10 maybe in this session. So a little bit, I'm not going to read so much because I think we have read the important parts. I'm just going to read some of them, maybe if required. So, but I'm just going to focus on the important aspects of, or important themes, important incidents outlined in these chapters. So, moving on, chapters 7 and 8. So, if you remember, chapter 6 ends with Gogol in at this vacation on this vacation with the Ratcliffes away and their lake house where they're playing being rustics, and he really does not he remembers that he has not given the vacation home number to Ashima. He's not unduly worried, and we see this chapter basically is about return to the roots after his experimentations with America. The tragedy in the family brings him back into the fold. So we see patterns of narrative repetition here, right? This is very important that there is a certain pattern of narrative repetition, right? In the chapter 5, at the end of chapter 5, as I said, we see repetition. Gogol is at the same place, at the same juncture in his life as Ashok was after the accident. Both of them, at the accident that changed Ashok's life, and then another accident that happened to Gogol. However, as I said, the life has changed. They have made another life. So for Gogol is much more safe and healthy and secure than Ashok was at the time. But we see that their lives are changing, just like Ashok and Ashima's changed after the accident, after the marriage. Gogol is the same at the same stage in his life. So there are patterns of narrative repetition. I think the start of chapter 7 is another this movement of narrative representation repetition. It again returns to, again midway it returns back to Ashima, just like the beginning of chapter 1, just like when the novel began in chapter 1, where she is making food for herself, waiting for the baby. Chapter 7 returns the focus on Ashima. This time her children are gone. There is a sense of change, passage of time. There has been a generational shift. We see the solidity and companionship in the relationship between Ashima and Ashok. Earlier on, their relationship was very tentative. They did not talk. She did not call out his name. There were silences. We learn that they do not express their affection in public. Not only in public, Ashok never would say "I love you" to Ashima, and she has accepted that. But by now, we have seen a certain kind of solidity and companionship in the relationship between Ashok and Ashima. Beneath that reticence, beneath that, what would seem to be coldness, lack of intimacy to an outsider, it is a very culture specific. Public displays of affection, expressions of love and affection are not very common. Ashok is especially not demonstrative, not expressive. So it might come across as a not a warm relationship, but we have seen over the period of time, over a passage of time, we have seen the solidity of their relationship, the companionship. Their relationship at the start seemed to be cold and distant. Ashima now enjoys Ashok's visits occurring every 3 weeks, so he's living elsewhere. He visits every 3 weeks. And Ashima has learned to do more things around the house. She is so independent compared to where she was, where she could not go out of the house, where stepping out of the house with Gogol was an achievement in itself. Now she has come a long way. Ashok still handles bills and manages the yard work. We also see her writing Christmas cards. So, in a way, what had started when they had moved and with the birth of the children, they have now integrated and made American traditions a part of their life. She works in library. Most importantly, she has American friends, right? She has a circle. She goes out on for tea. She calls them for tea, right? So she has, in a way, up to America and to the Americans. So, this leisurely narration of Ashima's life at the start of chapter 7 is interrupted by Ashok's call and then his very abrupt death. We are reminded of the phone call that Gogol did not pick up in the middle of the night when he was at the vacation home with the Ratlets. Gogol learns of his father's passing after a night with Maxine. He flies alone to Cleveland to take care of his father's belongings, although Maxine offers to accompany him. Gogol declines. Ashima tells Gogol that they do not. Gogol declines Maxine's company mainly because he wants to be on his own. It is a time where it is the time for him to reflect on, to remember his father and their relationship on his own, right? Ashima tells Gogol that they would not be keeping the belongings of the dead. It is not the Bengali way. This is not how they handle mourning. So everything that his father had in this Cleveland apartment has to be given away. Yet Gogol, who is a little bit of American now, chooses to stay in his father's apartment. He remembers the scenes of his past. He remembers when Ashok shaved off his head at the news of his father's death. And although he had laughed at that time, he now understands it as a gesture of mourning for the parent. Gogol realizes only after his father is gone how little of his father he knew and what his father chose to reveal to him over time, right? To share, to reveal his life to him had always been Ashok's decision. Gogol never really tried to prod, never really tried to know the father and his life. And Ashok himself, being a very private character, not an emotional, rather than emotional one, a man who has depth, who has feelings, but nevertheless does not share those feelings, does not express them with words. At this time, uh, uh, Gogol tries to establish a connection, but it's also a reflection on how the time has passed and how little he knew of his father. However, the family is a reminder of Ashok. So Sonia, Gogol, and Ashima mourn together. The community of friends come, they visit, but the three of them are strangely isolated and they are in each other's company. It is almost as if they are community, the Bengali friends also realize that at this moment the mourning, the grief of these three cannot be shared. Only the three of them can remember and grieve for Ashok. They follow the customs, they eat plain food, they avoid visitors. Maxine visits and she's surprised that Gogol does not want to escape the demands of the family and the rituals, right? So we see earlier on I mentioned how Maxine's interest in Gogol's life and Gogol's culture was a polite one. And here we see that, although she might show an interest in Indian food, Indian rituals, Indian way of life, but she cannot, Gogol does not want to escape all this. So here we see a little bit of her privilege, but Gogol declines her invitation to spend the new year with Ratliff. So he would rather spend remembering the new year, remembering Ashok, than celebrating it with the Ratliff. So in a way, Ashok's death brings the family together. Sonia moves back to Boston. Gogol makes more effort to keep in touch. They also remember the visits and the time, the memories that they had spent together. So it's like returning to the roots. Ashok's passing thus has the effect of binding Gogol more closely with the surviving members of his immediate family. Gogol realizes that the Ratcliffes are fundamentally a different family from the Gangulis. Not only are they different, as in they are different people, but they are different social codes, different traditions, different ways of life. And for Gogol, mourning is not something to be done alone. It is instead a public act or a communal act, rather, not public, a communal act of grieving. Communal in the sense it's done with close blood relations, family members. And here Maxine is an outsider. So it kind of mirrors a circle of life. We started with the story of birth, and here midway we have a death. The birth marked with separation, right? The migrant moving away from home, a sense of being in exile, being uprooted. And in contrast, death is marked with a sense of togetherness, of the family, of the immigrant community, which kind of rallies around these three people. Ashima is not alone. She has her children, she has her friends, she has a family in America. So that is what chapter 7 is about. Now let's moving on to chapter 8. Again, we see a passage of time. Gogol has broken up with Maxine. He's closer to the sister and the mother. As I mentioned earlier, there is the Ashok's death has an effect of returning to the roots. He has an affair with another architect, a married one. It's a very furtive affair, which is only physical in nature. Behest, he meets and he goes out on a date with a family friend, the one Moshmi. Now, if you remember, we had seen Moshmi earlier on his 14th birthday, the girl with English accent, the one he used to read at Ganguly family parties, the one who preferred England to America. Gogol has not seen her since his 14th birthday. Moshmi remembers him as Gogol and not Nikhil. So Moshmi is a kind of, a reminder from the part of the life where he used to be only Gogol. Now, like most of the immigrant children, Moshmi is also into academics. Gogol, Yale and Columbia. Moshmi is studying French literature. She's a PhD student in French literature in NYU. She has lived in NYU, New York University. She has lived in Paris several years ago. And she was engaged. We come to it very acrimoniously, very bitterly. And Moshmi is kind of coming when she goes out on this date, she's recovering from that marriage disaster. So, in a way, both of them, when they meet here, they're coming after a breakup. Uh, Gogol from after a breakup with Maxine, uh, Moshmi after a breakup with the American banker. So they're coming from bad place when they meet each other. So one that is common, the one thing that commons that brings together this relationship is one, they are both set up by their parents. The date is set up by the parents, by the approval of their parents. So earlier on, they did not date Indians. They wanted to fish outside the bowl. I think something like that is mentioned in the novel. But now it's like return to the roots. So it's like a return to roots in all the aspects. He's dating an Indian girl. They agree to date an Indian person. One, that is common. Secondly, they're coming from a bad place. They're coming after a breakup. Thirdly, what makes their relationship is also their shared memories and experiences, their shared background, which brings them together. Their romance quickly follows after several months. They spend a great deal of time together. They marvel that despite knowing each other as children and promising never to get involved with Bengalis, they found each other in New York. And even more, how could they be so how they wonder and they're surprised how could they be so uh, how could they be so similar. They're even set up by their parents on a blind date, and this is not very different from the arranged relationships that we saw earlier. They were a part of Bengali culture. The chapter ends with a narrator describing from Moshami's point of view her life before Gogol. She went to Brown University, and though her parents wanted her to find a lucrative career like medicine, she chose to study literature. She went to France. She had a romance with an American banker who proposed to her, and yet They begin fighting after moving back from Paris, and Moshmi realized that the banker is not at all comfortable with some of the customs of the Bengali relatives, and something that we saw in something that we saw in Gogol and Maxine's relationship. Initially, there was polite interest, but beyond that, Maxine does not understand why Gogol wants to be in that conservative, traditional kind of a life. So the same thing has happened to Moshmi. Here again, we see the theme of cultural difference and how it shapes the life of second generation who are Americans, but they are also marked with difference that they cannot erase. Being Bengalis, that's the difference. They might be Americans, but at the same time, they're Indians. They are Bengalis. They cannot and they do not want to erase that difference. Right? At this point, both Gogol and Moshmi have learned that being Bengali is a part of their roots and they're not going to erase those roots. So Moshmi splits up, breaks the engagement, and on meeting Gogol, when she meets Gogol, Moshmi has literally clawed her way out of depression and she speaks of her life with the banker as something deep in her past. Lahiri's narrator, Lahiri's narrative frames Moshmi and Gogol's courtship as a return, right? Return for both of them. They have experimented with Americanness, American relationships, and now their relationship with each other is kind of a return. And this is not without irony, for each has spent a good deal of time trying to move away from the close circle of Bengali families. Now, Gogol's life can be tracked in different ways, I would say. We can talk of Gogol's life, we can plot his life through the women, right? So, his time in college coinciding with his intellectual growth, his love for literature, and also his affair with Ruth. His time in New York, his relationship with Maxine is an introduction to the bohemian, intellectual American way of life and to another way of relating to one's parents. Moshmi marks return to the roots. And what are the roots, or rather, where are their roots? They have never lived in it. But oh, yeah, so that is a question. Where are the roots? They have never lived in India, even on holidays, which were undertaken with great reluctance on their part, and there is relief when they come back to India. So neither Gogol nor Moshmi are entirely Bengalis. And sometimes each has felt not entirely American either. So they are liminal, they're Bengalis and they're Americans. They're neither completely Bengalis nor completely American, although they grew up in America. For Lahiri, then, the cultural displacement that Gogol and Moshmi feel from India to US is a permanent one, right? The displacement, that journey that Ashok and Ashima made from India to from Kolkata or Calcutta to Ashima move geographically. They adapt to certain ways of American life, but they're more firmly entrenched in Indian way of life. On the other hand, Gogol and Moshmi are somewhere in between. They're neither home in America nor in India. If you remember earlier on in the novel, Ashima says that being diasporic, being a foreigner, being an being an immigrant is not much different from being permanently pregnant, right? There is always an anticipation. It's a life of waiting, lifelong waiting for trying to return home, for trying to feel at home. And we see that this cultural displacement that the first generation feels is also there in the next generation. For but there is a home. There is a home in Calcutta. For Moshmi and Gogol, there is no permanent home. Or home is this sense of hybridity, belong to worlds simultaneously. This zone where they are both Bengali Americans together. This is home. There is no physical home as such for them. It is only this feeling that they identify that brings them together, of being liminal, of being hybrid, of being Bengali Americans, that brings them together. So there is no physical home, only this sense of hybridity. Bengali and American, these were often, but being Bengali and American is all do not always reconcile. They are always often a conflict between being a Bengali or being an American. And this is something which people like Graham, the American banker, or Maxine uh, understand because of their Americanness. They are firmly securely rooted in America, whereas Moshmi and Gogol are, the sense of rootlessness is permanent. The sense of rootlessness is their home, right? So Maxine and Graham cannot understand it. So is there any solution for this? This marriage between people uh, of shared similar background, the relationships kind of seems to offer a solution, not only to the fact that they have suffered because with the Graham and Maxine because of the cultural difference, but here what brings them together, both of them feel the alienation, and this cultural alienation brings them together. Both of them face it, and that is what brings them together. So this cultural alienation is something that identifies, brings them together, but in the next few chapters we see that that in itself is an illusion. So moving on to the next few chapters, which as I said, I would try and cover in this session so that we can move ahead with the novel quickly. I'm not, as you saw, I'm not reading much from the novel itself, but you can, of course, go and read about all these incidents, read the novel in itself closely. I'm not reading because most of these things we have already discussed in detail with the incidents uh, in the first few chapters. So, chapter 9 to 11, we see the marriage and we also see how the marriage falls apart, right? They had come together after a bad experience. They had been brought together with shared experiences, shared background, brought together with by a sense of cultural alienation that they faced when they had an affair with Maxine and when Moshmi had an affair with the American banker Graham. But these things that bring them together, the parental approval, the bad experiences in relationships, the shared background, it is clearly not enough to see them through this relationship. One can contrast their relationship with Ashok and Ashima's, the marriage that succeeded due to Ashima's sacrifices like a career, her love for literature, her decision to follow the husband to America and stay. The second generation is grown beyond that. Moshmi teaches in Princeton. She gets a fellowship, right? So she has a life beyond marriage and family, unlike Ashima. We also see, just like we saw Ashima and Ashok's group of friends belonging to the same culture, Bengali community in America, growing as Ashima and Ashok find their roots, find their home in America. We see Moshmi's friends, Donald and Astrid, and again we see how Moshmi had tried to integrate herself with the American way of life and how she's still trying to do that. With her close relationship with Donald and Astrid, she keeps with those friends. Unlike Gogol, who has moved back to the roots with Ashima and Sonia, Moshmi still has an American side to herself, has an American side to her life, which she likes to keep up, where Gogol does not feel very comfortable. There are certain incidents where, the dinner that they go to Donald and Astrid's house, Ashok, Gogol feels very uncomfortable. Here there is a sense of betrayal when Moshmi tells everyone that his name is not Nikhil but Gogol. So we see slowly how Moshmi is different and she wants other things in life, right? Something that Gogol, in his return, by returning to the roots, cannot really provide. So Moshmi's affair is furtive. No, she has fallen in this very conservative traditional way of life, and I feel that her affair with Dimitri, I think, yeah, is an attempt to take control of her life. That her life is not circumscribed by marriage, right? Just like Ashima took Gogol and went out of the house. This is Moshe's way of taking control. That marriage is not everything. Her life is not circumscribed by Gogol and what the family wants. That she hasn't. She wants to preserve this illusion that she does not conform. That she is no, she is does not basically she has not given in to the pressures of conformity. So the affair is an attempt to preserve an illusion that she has not given into the pressures of conformity. As I said, it is a tussle between individuality. She's asserting her individuality in response to the pressures of tradition and community. Also, there is a basic difference here we see in in their nature. The basic difference in Gogol and Moshami, and this comes to fore here when she has an affair. There is a kind of foreignness that is inherently desirable to Moshmi. This foreignness being in Paris. She feels at home in Paris, in this foreignness of Paris. She likes to travel. There is this foreignness is desirable, is something that Moshmi desires. This non-conformity is something that Moshmi desires. It is not that way for Gogol, who craves for stability and comfort in his life. So for the two young people, uh, they live in much different world from that of their parents. The narrator does not blame Gogol and Moshmi for their modern way of life, nor does the narrator laud Ashima and Ashok for staying together despite all the obstacles. Their marriages, we see that the contrast between the marriages. We also see the contrast between the characters, Ashok and Ashima and Gogol and Moshami. We in the contrast between the characters, we see the contrast between the generations, and that has led to their marriages and what happened to their marriages. So these are the prominent things that happen. I think you should read about the dinner at Donald and Astrid's house, where Moshmi, for the first time, he kind of does not feel happy with Moshmi, her smoking, the way she reveals his name to everyone. The Paris trip, which is again like the widening distance between them. Gogol being more interested in going out for photography, Moshmi being more interested in meeting people, intellectuals for her conference and everything. The anniversary dinner, where we again see that how the relationship, how they go to a place that Astrid and Donald had suggested, and both of them do not like it. Uh, so it's like we see the growing distance between them. She of course gets a research fellowship, which she and the whole idea when she gets a research fellowship, and the fact that she has to turn it down because she's married. She has to turn down this very prestigious fellowship uh, because she's married. That is what leads her to reflect that on the fact that now all her career decisions, now all her life decisions are going to be based on the fact that she is married. And to assert some kind of a control, it is going to be beyond her control now. She wants to take the fellowship but cannot because she's married. So to assert some kind of control, to assert this, to preserve this illusion that she is independent, she has an affair with Dimitri, and that leads to the end of their marriage. The last chapter returns to the narration from Gogol's perspective. Moshmi is away and Gogol suspects nothing, and although he does notice, certain things, she noticed that she is uh, something about the swimsuit that she's packing and things like that. There are hints that she might be having an affair, but then later she discovers later on, and again, very interestingly, it happens that the relationship breaks up as they are on this train journey back home. Right, they are on a train journey back home. So, in a way, the relationship, we again have this train motive, important things, important conversations happen on this train journey. That is where, on a train journey, Gogol realizes that Moshmi is having an affair. So, with that, the next session is just going to be on the last chapter and a quick wrap up. Do write to me if you want some parts of the novel to be discussed in more detail, some incidents, some events. If you want them to be discussed in greater detail, you can put it down in the comments. I will try to do that. I have kind of rushed through the last few chapters because I felt that we have discussed and it was getting repetitive. So I've rushed through the last few chapters, but I think you have enough on the themes and motives of the book. In these few chapters we have discussed it, and you can discuss any extracts. But if you feel the need, you can write to me in the comments. If you feel that I have missed out on something, do let me know again on the comment in the comment section. And of course, you can show your appreciation by liking and subscribing and so on. All right. See you in the last session of this for this book.